Today we're going to be learning Yoma Daf Mem Gimel. Today's daf is sponsored by Tamima Pilchowski for Refuah Shlema for Shiur Pilchowski, Shmuel ben Fega Rachel, and by Shiur Krebs in honor of the Hebrew birthday of my number one Daf Yomi supporter, my sister Rena Berger. Okay, we're going to get started. What we started doing was a discussion. We were comparing. We started with these two shchitot. We have the shchita of the par, the bull of the Kohen Gadol, and the shchita of the para aduma, of the red heifer. And what we said is, we know that one of them is kshera bazar, one is psula bazar, one a non-Kohen can do, and one a non-Kohen can't do. Normally, shchita can be done by a non-Kohen, but there's an exception to the rule. One of these, it can't be. And we're not sure which one. Rav and Shmuel have a disagreement about this. From that, we got into all these issues about the para aduma, the red heifer. And what we started with was this line of Ula, which we're going to get into more today, which is that if you look at this parsha, what I did to make this easier, or at least more noticeable, is I brought all the psukim of the section that we're going to darshan. Okay, basically chapter 19 of Bamidbar of the para aduma. The whole first half is going to be only about the para aduma. From psukim 1 to 10, and then again 17 and 18, which describes all the actions of preparing, slaughtering the red heifer, doing, then burning it, putting in the azov and all that we saw they throw in to the burning, then they take it, then they take the ashes, they add the water, all the stages of the process, then they sprinkle, then they put in a twig and they kind of throw, sprinkle it on someone. Who can do which stages? And if you're going to notice, if you even look at the sheet on the second side, the second page of the sheet for today, you can see that if you look at the psukim, it starts off with talk to Bnei Israel, and then it goes to Elazar Kohen, and then it says again Elazar Kohen, and then it says HaKohen, and then it says HaKohen, and then it says HaKohen, and then it says Ish Tahor, and then it says again Ish Tahor. So the question is, why does it have to keep repeating the subject name, and why does it move from one to the other, and what's going on here exactly? So what they're going to say is, this section is a little bit confusing because sometimes a word and who the character is said in the next verse to distinguish it from the previous. And sometimes it's said to continue it and say, oh, we're still dealing with the same person. Okay. And it's a continuation. So that's what we're going to darshan today, which is really some of the drashot. And that's why I charted it out and I showed you which drashot have to do with this mimela or miyad, right? Miyad mashma means you can imply from here that this is now separating it from the previous, right? Before it was the Elazar. Now all of a sudden it's the Kohen. That must be saying, oh, we're moving on to somebody else, right? Or sometimes it's mimela mashma, that this is telling you we're continuing from the previous and we're not changing characters or anything. Some of these drashot aren't going to have to do with that principle, but some of them are. So we started already with two drashot yesterday. The first drashot was to teach you, when it says the first mention of Elazar Kohen, it's to teach you Elazar Kohen is doing it now, but not for future generations. That's what they said, right? Because it said in the Tatem Ota, meaning this one, but not ones in future generations. And then it was a debate. So then who does this? Because remember, he was the skan, he was the second in command. Does it go up a level to the Kohen Gadol, or does it go down a level to a Kohen Idiot, a regular Kohen? Then the second drasha was, it said that you take the para, right? Sorry, I want to find the verse. V'hotzi ota. You take out the para. Now, take out the para. Why ota? It, to say only it, not with anyone else, not with any other animal. Remember, we talked about trying to get the para out of there, and then not with any other animal. I was laughing yesterday because I was at a friend's and she had a dog and she couldn't get the dog to move. She wanted to move it because my daughter didn't like the dog and she was trying to get the dog to go into the other room. And it was this whole thing about how to get the dog to move. And I was cracking up because it was exactly what we were discussing. How do you get the para to move without, she didn't want to grab it. She didn't have another dog around to kind of get the dog moving. So it was kind of funny because it was the exact same thing. The dog didn't want to move and she couldn't get it moving. So anyway, we saw there were two reasons. Rabbi Shimon darshan Tami Dekha, which is we didn't want it to go out with the black one because people say maybe slaughter the black one and not a red one because you might think you slaughtered both. We're going to learn today what the problem is with slaughtering both. So that's the first drasha for today. V'shachatota, we're now starting at the top of Mem Gimel. Shelo yishchot acheret ima, that you can't slaughter another one along with it. There's a debate how to understand this. Some people think that what this means is you can't take one long knife and in one Nick, slaughter both. That's a problem. But if you did one after the other, it would be okay. Some people say, no, you can't do one after the other. Because when you're doing the para aduma, you're not allowed to do any other work while you're doing it. And that slaughtering a different animal would be a distraction from the one that you're doing. It would be like doing some other avodah while you're working on the para aduma. So it's a debate about whether you can't slaughter them both one after the other, or maybe you can according to the first reading. It's just you can't slaughter them at exactly the same time. And then again, there'll be this concern that people will think that you slaughter them either one after the other, if that's the problem, or at the same time. So the previous drasha was, because of that, you can't have the para go out with it. This is actually stating the halacha itself, which is that you can't slaughter another one with it. Lifanav, this we already darshan. Remember, it said he slaughters it in front of him. So who's he and who's it in front of? So in front of, it's clearly in front of Elazar Kohen. The question is, who's the slaughterer? And this all depended on whether you think shchita is kshera bizar or not. So if you say shchita is kshera bizar, then obviously Elazar is not the shochet. If you think it is, then he's the shochet, in which case shachato tolefanav. Well, what does it mean? He slaughtered in front of himself. So yeah, that's what it means. L'rav shelo yasiach da'ato mimena. Remember, we said that comes to teach you this halacha. This is a review from yesterday. This teaches you the halacha that you can't take your mind off of it. So shachato talefanav means Elazar slaughters it in front of himself, meaning he has to be watching it at all times. L'shmuel, what does it come to teach you? Sheyehezar shochet ve'Elazar ro'eh. Who's slaughtering? Not Elazar. Yes, it's true, Elazar was the subject, but now he's the subject of the lifanav. It has to be done in front of him. But the shechita can be done by anyone, just like shechita is always permitted by a non-Kohen. And again, why are we saying this here? If we already said this yesterday, it's because we're now lining up the entire parsha, who does which stage. So we're just repeating it because we're going through who does what stage. How we darshan all these verses, and with a specific emphasis on the characters mentioned in the parsha. Next pasuk, v'lakach. It's actually, I think, two pasukim later. No, it's the next pasuk, pasuk daled. V'lakach Elazar HaKohen. Now we already were dealing with Elazar HaKohen, or maybe we weren't. According to Shmuel, we weren't. According to Shmuel, it was a zar. According to Rav, we already were with Elazar HaKohen. So what's this pasuk coming to tell us? The subject of this sentence is now who's going to sprinkle the blood from the slaughter, from the animal, toward the heichal. Remember, that was the whole thing. They have to see the heichal while they're sprinkling, even though they're standing at the Mount of Olives, and they start throwing the blood. L'shmuel lahadure le'Elazar. So according to Shmuel, it has to say Elazar to teach us. Now, again, we're going to get to both of them. We're actually going to say mashma miyad mashma. We're switching characters now. This is our first case of, we're going to say, this pasuk is a clear change from the previous. Okay, until now, it was a zar, a non-Kohen. Now it says, lakach Elazar, it's to tell us, la durei Elazar, we're moving back to Elazar. He's now the main character. Okay, he's the one who does this action. Rav, now according to Rav, it was already Elazar in the previous pasuk. So why do you repeat Elazar? So there's this concept. If this is a mi'ut achar mi'ut, it's like a double negative. When you say it's only Elazar, and then you say again it's only Elazar, it must be coming, a double negative becomes a positive. It's to teach you, ein mi'ut achar mi'ut, ela l'rabot da'afilu kohen hedyot. It's to tell you, it doesn't have to be Elazar. Elazar did the slaughtering. Now this next stage doesn't actually have to be Elazar. It could be any kohen. That's why it says Elazar. Now it's weird. You might say it should say, if that's what it was really trying to teach you, it should say HaKohen. But the way they understand this mi'ut achar mi'ut, it's this hermeneutic principle that you can take, that when it already says something that's obvious, it must be coming to teach you something else. And therefore, it must be teaching you, yes, Elazar did it, but it really could be done by any other Kohen. So now we've moved in the subject according to Rav. So again, both of them say that this pasuk is motzi miyad mashma. It's implied that we're switching characters. So again, according to Shmuel, it was a non-Kohen. We now switch to Elazar, and which then Lidorot would be either the Kohen Hedyot or Kohen Gadol, depending on how you read that, where you side on that machloket. And according to Rav, before Elazar was doing the slaughtering, this part of the sprinkling of the blood could be done by any Kohen. Now, the next verse we get to, the next action is to take this hyssop branch and the cedar wood, right? The cedar wood is first, then the hyssop branch, and the shni tolat, that red strip of wool, and he puts it in the burning of the parah. So it's not the next action, but it's the next action where someone's name appears. It says HaKohen. So now, according to Rav, we already were at Kohen. According to Shmuel, we were with Elazar. So Shmuel, Dafilu b'Kohen Idiot. Again, according to Shmuel, this is Motzi Miyad Mashma. It's saying, again, we're switching characters. And before it was Elazar who did the previous, now this part can be done by any Kohen. L'Rav, who already we were up to a Kohen, so why did you need to tell us this is done by a Kohen? Well, it's true. You needed to. Even though already the previous thing was done by a Kohen, we had to stress that this is done by a Kohen. Why? Sal kadat achamina, you might have thought, kevan de lav gufa de paraninu loli by a Kohen. You might have thought already we can switch down to a non-Kohen. Why? Because we're not dealing with the parah anymore. The parah is burning, and we're adding something external into the parah aduma, right? Into the burning of the red heifer. Because it's not dealing with the body of the Kohen, maybe someone else can come along and do it. Kamashma, and that's why I had to say Kohen. And now this is an example of mashma mimela mashma. This word Kohen is coming to teach you. We're continuing from the previous. We were already with a regular Kohen, and he gets to continue, meaning we don't drop down a level to a zar. So according to Rav and Shmuel each have a different way of understanding the general idea of this pasuk. Is it coming to say we're switching characters or we're continuing the previous character? Next pasuk. V'chibes begadav hakohen. Now we get to the next pasuk, which says the Kohen has to wash his clothes. Now again it says v'chibes begadav hakohen. Why does it say the Kohen again? Who else would be v'chibes begadav? If already we're on the Kohen, we're just continuing. Washes his clothes. So this is to teach you, we're already leaving this idea of mimela miyad. It doesn't have to do with that. It's to teach you something else, biki hu no, that he has to be wearing his Kohen clothing. Whatever Kohen does, these actions has to be wearing, right? All the actions we discussed before, he has to be wearing his Kohen clothing. What about this continuation of that verse? It says, Vitameh ha-Kohen ad ha'erev. Again, you don't need the word Kohen. We already know he's the Kohen. You just say, right? You just said a second ago, obviously the subject is the Kohen. You don't need to say it again. So why do you say it again? Kohen b'kiuno l'doro. It's to teach you that also in future generations, the Kohen has to be wearing his clothes when he does this. So now they say, if you're saying that the person who does the paraduma is no longer Elazar, it doesn't have to be the skan, it could be a regular Kohen idiot, Shapir, then we understand this whole thing. They're telling you it could be done by a regular Kohen. You might have thought, now why would you have thought he didn't need his clothes? Because he's outside the temple. Maybe he only needs his clothes when he's doing a ritual inside the temple. Comes the verse to teach you, he also needs his clothes, not only during the desert, but not only the first time they did it, but also in future generations. That makes sense. Shapir. Ela lamanda amar ledorot bekohen gadol. Hashta kohen gadol beina bekiuno mibaya. But wait a minute. If you're going to say that a Kohen Gadol has to do this, now, if you say this is done by a Kohen Gadol and it's done outside the temple, you can understand why it's kind of a drop in level because it's outside the temple. Maybe he wouldn't need his clothes. But if you're going to say this ceremony requires the Kohen Gadol, who barely does any ceremonies in the temple, of course he's going to need his Kohen Gadol clothes. This is saying we're going up in level. Even though it's done outside the temple, this is a very important action. And therefore, if the Kohen Gadol is doing something as a Kohen Gadol, of course he's going to wear his Shmona Begadim. There's no one would ever think that he wouldn't be wearing his Kohen Gadol clothes. So therefore, right, if you're saying Kohen Gadol, that you need a Kohen Gadol, you would need a pasuk to teach you that he needs to do it with his Kohen Gadol clothes. So they say, in fact, you would need a pasuk. Why? Not because you really need a pasuk, but because there's this principle that we've seen in other places. Sometimes there's things that you can learn by kavachomer. Here it doesn't, right? It is a kavachomer. It's saying if you need sort of a kavachomer, it sort of means logic. Even something very logical, sometimes the Torah says it explicitly. Okay, so it's true. You could have figured it out otherwise, but sometimes the Torah goes out of its way to teach you something that was pretty obvious from the beginning. Okay, continuing on next drasha. Okay, what I did on the chart here is I brought all the verses. If you're not looking at it, it's helpful to look at your review, because basically we're just going to go verse by verse by verse by verse, darshan it. And then what I put at the end of the chart again is, does this connect with this concept of motzi miyad or motzi mimel? So now we're up to the collecting of the ashes. And now all of a sudden, again, we're changing characters. We started with Elazar Kohen, we had that twice. We moved to the Kohen, we had that 3 mentions of it, which we darshaned each one. Now we get to the collecting after we burn it and we throw the Eitz Ezov and Erez and all that and the Tolat Shani. Now we go to gathering the ashes from the para. After that, we're going to add it. There's a debate whether we add it to the water or we add the water to the ashes. Okay, that's a side debate. It doesn't come up actually, I think it comes up in the Gemara somewhere. We'll see. But it's also a debate between the Rishonim, what we do. But either which way, those are the 2 actions we're going to discuss now, collecting the ashes and mixing it with water. So all of a sudden we have ish tahor, a pure person. That's already, doesn't sound like a Kohen. And let's see what this teaches you. Ish lachshira tazal. We're already getting out of Kohen. We don't even need a Kohen anymore. Anyone can collect the ashes. Tahor lachshira taisha. The fact that it says pure comes to teach you we're going to include another person. Even a woman can collect the ashes. We saw this yesterday. Vihiniach, and he places it down. That's the continuation of that verse. Mi sheyesh lo da'at laniach. Now it has to be someone who knows how to put something down. Yatz'u cheresh shoteh v'katan she'en behem da'at laniach. We're going to now exclude the deaf, the shoteh, and I never know exactly how to translate this word, but someone who doesn't have clear mind, and a katan, and a minor. Now, these 3 characters, right? The cheresh is always a little complicated because why someone's deaf doesn't have dad, especially nowadays, things are very different. But we can assume that maybe they're talking about a deaf mute. Okay, there we assume that person already has less knowledge. There's a whole debate about where we draw the line on cheresh. It's not so clear cut, but that's a topic for another time when this Gemara is going to get more into the cheresh. The main point is here. Anyone who doesn't understand what it means to place something down, that kind of person can't do this action. So they're the only ones excluded, but a woman and a non-Kohen are included. Tanan Hatam. So that's for gathering the ashes. Tanan Hatam. Now there's a Mishnah that talks about this. Now we're moving on to the next topic, which is Kiddush, which is mixing it with water. Okay, so now we're going to darshan this. It says in the Mishnah, HaKol ksherim lekadesh. So the same as v'asaf is also v'kidesh. It's the same thing. Whoever can do the collecting, the gathering, like a woman and a non-Kohen, can also do the mixing it with water. But Rabbi Yehuda machshir b'katan, he says the exact opposite. A minor, yes, uposel b'ishal b'androginus. But a woman and someone who has both male and female genital signs, which is also considered a woman, they cannot do this. My Tamid Rabbanan. So now we have to understand, we have a flipped machloket, okay? Right? One says katan yes, one says katan no. One says isha yes, one says isha no, right? Each one says one is pasul, one is kasher. So now we're going to bring the reasons why, where they get this from. My Tamid Rabbanan. So we're going to darshan the next pasuk, which is v'lakchu latamei me'efer srefat hachatat. So now they take for the tameh from the ashes of the, right, it's actually weird because instead of afer, which is ashes, it talks about afar, the dust, but it really means from the ashes of srefat para. Okay, we're now in, right, where is this pasuk? Right, in Yud Zayin. V'natan alav mayim chayim al keli. And they put, it actually sounds like from the pshat, they put on it water, right, into a kli. Now, mayim chayim, fresh water. There's something weird about this verse. It starts off with vilakhu, which is plural, and they take for the tameh from the ashes. Vinnatan, and he puts it, singular. So there's something weird about this. Rabbanan don't darshan this weirdness, right, just yet. They're going to darshan something else. They're going to start with the vav, vilakhu. So now I want it to be clear here. The asefa, the gathering, was done in pasuk tet, 9, verse 9. We now are already on verse 17, but it's the next major action that happens. And what they're going to say is that since it says vilakhu with the vav in the beginning, and he's going to say vilakhu l'tamei me'afar srefat hachatat, hani de pasalach ba'asefa pasalach b'kiddush. right? We haven't also introduced, I think it's partly the Vav, and also we haven't introduced a new character. So it must be whoever, right? Whoever did the previous is going to be able to continue and do this. This is one of those mashma mimela mashma. It's no different than it was before. So now he says, right? So hanach de paselach ba'asifa, paselach b'kiddush, hanach de achsherelach ba'asifa, achsherelach b'kiddush. Whoever was not able to do the gathering can't do this. Whoever was able to do the gathering can mix the water also. It's a continuation. The Rabbi Yehuda is going to say no. He says we're shifting gears here. Something new here. What does he say? Im kain lemakach v'lakach. It should have then said v'lakach. Everything's in singular. It's one person. Why would it say v'lakchu in plural? It must be to include more people. My v'lakchu dafilu katan depasel chatam hacha kasher. Lakchu comes to teach you that we're going to add more people. That even a katan who couldn't do the previous can do this one. So he's going to say that's where he gets it. The katan can do it. Now, remember, he also said a woman can't do it. So where does he get that from? So Ishamanale, Vinatan, Velo Vinatna, because it says Vinatan, Natan is masculine, doesn't say Vinatna, even though obviously grammatically in Hebrew you would say Vinatan to include men and women, but the rabbis have kind of drasha capabilities. They can sometimes say, oh, this is Zachar, that means only men. And he learns from the fact that it says Vinatan. In other words, what he's basically saying is the switch back. Why wouldn't it just say Vinatnu? Just like Vilakhu, Vinatnu, it must be we're trying to limit someone else, must be limiting the woman. The Rabbanan, how are they going to respond to this? Right, the whole drasha of Rabbi Yehuda was premised on the difference between, and this answers the question someone just asked about, isn't tahor masculine? But what they're talking about is the fact that it started with plural and went to singular. It's changing. It's plural sounds like we're including more, singular sounds like we're excluding. So that's why he said we must be including the children and excluding the women. But Rabbanan are going to say, no, I'll tell you why they switch from plural to singular for a different reason. Because if you had kept it all in singular like everything else was, you would have thought it has to be the same person who takes the ashes and the same person who mixes it with the water. Therefore, it says it in plural to say, no, could be a bunch of people collected, and we'll see in a second, and only one person puts it in the water. If you wanted to say that it could be a lot of people, and it doesn't have to be the same person doing both, you could have just said, why not? You would have thought if it said, if it kept the whole thing in plural, as plural already would imply, doesn't have to be the same person. They said, not necessarily. You might have thought, you might need the same two people. You have to have a bunch of people collecting it. Has to be two people. And those same two people have to also be the same ones. Vinatnu. If you keep it the same, it again makes it sound like those people have to continue what they're doing. Therefore, therefore it changes it specifically from plural to singular to teach you, could be two people could take it and only one person this. It's to tell you there's no connection between who does the first action and who does the second. That's why it says it has nothing to do with including a minor and excluding the women. Sorry, I lost my place. Okay. Now we're moving on. After we mix it with water, the next thing is you take the ezov, the hyssop branch, you dip it in the water, and you start to sprinkle it on the person who needs it. Now the question is, who can do this? So now we're going to have the exact reverse of what was allowed in the previous. So again, if you look back at the chart, it's very helpful. Tanakama had said the minors can't do the gathering of the ashes and putting it in the water, mixing it with the water. The katan can't do it, and the woman can do it, right? Both the gathering and the putting the water. Rabbi Yehuda said that when it gets to the water, it's not the same as gathering of the ashes, and it's going to be the reverse. The woman can't, and the minor can. Now we're going to have, each one is going to switch when it comes to this next action, which, by the way, is going to mean that this next verse, what's the issue? The next verse again says ish tahor. What is ish tahor coming to tell you? We're switching characters again, right? That again, mashma miyad mashma. We're diverting from what was before. So whatever each one has is going to be the reverse. So they take the hisap and they dip it in the water, a pure person. Le Rabbanan, he's going to darshan it like this. Ish velo isha. Ish is man, not a woman. Tahor lachshir takatan. Again, tahor is going to include something instead of it including the women, because it did that last time, and this is obviously a digression from that. So it's going to include the minor. Ula Rabbi Yehuda, he's going to have to say the opposite. Ish means a full-grown man. Velo katan, and not a minor. Tahor is lachshir taisha. In the same way the Chachamim darshan this before, right? And actually everyone darshan this before by the Asaf. He's going to now say the tahor includes a woman. Meitive. But now we're going to have a question. So again, whatever they said the previous time, they're now flipping it. Now we have a question from a bright. Hakok sherin lahazot. Everyone can do the sprinkling, which is what we're discussing right now. Chutz mitumtum v'androginus v'isha. Not someone who has neither male nor female, their genital signs are covered, or an androgynous that has both, or a woman. All those are considered potentially, partially women. Therefore, none of them can do this. V'katan sheyesh bo da'at isha mesaya'ato mazeh. There's something a little bit weird here. A katan that doesn't have, there's a debate whether this says sheyesh bo or she'ein bo. So the Masorah Hashas fixes it to she'ein bo da'at. A katan that doesn't have knowledge, isha mesaya'ato umazeh. A woman is allowed to help this minor to do it, meaning the woman herself can't do it, and the minor himself can't do it, but the minor can actually do it with help from the woman. But still it's saying the minor can do it, the woman can't. It doesn't say a woman can do it if a katan helps her. The katan can do it, the minor. And what does this seem to say? This is Tanakama's opinion. Below Palig Rabbi Yehuda, and it doesn't say in this Braita that Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. So therefore, they're saying this seems to be a contradiction to Rabbi Yehuda. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda doesn't actually think this. To which Abai answers, and this goes back to why we started with Ula in the first place, possibly. Kevan da Amar Mar, since Ula said, Mashma motzi miyad mashma, umashma mimela palik. Has to be that Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Why? Because we already learned, and now having learned this section, we understand this much better, that there's certain words in this section that are coming to say we're switching people, right? This is different from the previous verse. And some of them are saying this is a continuation of the previous verse. Now, based on everything we learned, it's very clear that since we already mentioned the Ish Tahor in verse number 9, and then we again meet the Ish Tahor in verse number 18 without having anyone switch characters in the middle, it must be that the Ish Tahor in verse 18 is coming to separate this Ish Tahor from the person in the previous section, which means that Rabbi Yehuda must flip his opinions, which means he must disagree. If he disagreed with Rabbanan about the first one, he has to disagree with him here because there's clearly a switch in character here. And therefore, it must be, even though this Braita didn't mention that Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, he must disagree because based on the principles that Ula taught us, has to be that there's a switch here of characters. Okay, and it's coming to say, we're already saying something different than we were in the previous section. Okay, moving on with more drashot. V'hizah hatahor ala tameh. Now all of a sudden we just have a tahor. We no longer have ish tahor, we just have tahor. And now we say, hizah tahor ala tameh. I see, by the way, I see someone's asking that, how do we say tahor excludes women when before it included women? But again, that's the whole point here. That the fact that the Torah says the same thing twice must be coming to say we're talking about something different than before. This is in the world of drashot. Obviously, the pshat doesn't sound that way, but that's the whole idea here of what Ula is trying to say. Next verse, hizah tahor ala tameh. Tahor. Now we're going to learn something different from tahor here. This is no longer ish tahor. This is just hatahor is mazeh the tameh. We learned this before, and this is a big debate between the tzdukim and the prushim, if you remember. Michlal shehu tameh. Tahor comes to say, well, he's tahor from being tameh, and he must have a little bit of tumah about him still, because otherwise, why would we call him tahor? Tahor is only relative, right? It's to say you're pure, maybe you were impure before this. And you can see why the tzdukim disagree, because that's not really what it says in the pasuk. But limed al tful yom shakasher b'para. They say this is where we learn that a tful yom can do the paraduma. What is it, Tful Yom? Remember, it's someone who has to go to the mikveh. They go to the mikveh in the morning or sometime during the day, and they have to wait till the sun sets to be 100% pure. Now, generally, they're considered that they have some sort of tuma about them. That's the kind of person, according to this, is included in this verse. He can be tahor from being tamei, meaning he went to the mikveh, even if the sun hasn't set yet. So it's Tful Yom can do it. Ad kedei kach, they believe this pasuk, and we're against the tzdukim who thought that it's Tful Yom can't do the paraduma. But if you remember, they would make sure they would be mitame the person on purpose, and then have them go to the mikveh in the morning, and then do the paraduma ceremony so that they could say, look, we believe it so strongly that we're actually going to do it. And then, if you remember, they have to bend over backwards and all sorts of other issues to make sure they take care of purity and impurity laws very carefully as regards to paraduma, so that people don't think that the fact that Tful Yom is doing it, meaning, oh, we don't really care about Tum and Tara about here, but no, really, it's fine. Okay, meaning, right, we're very careful about Tum and Tara. It's just that we believe that it's Tful Yom can do it. And that we've learned about many times before. Now we're going to go back to our machloket. We started with Shtei shchitot, right? One is kshera bazar, one is psula bazar, one has to do with the par, one has to do with the para. We don't know which one. We had a debate, Shmuel and Rav, right? Shmuel said para aduma is kshera bazar, and the par kohen gadol is not. And Rav said the para aduma is psula bazar. It has to be a kohen. Now we're going to have another opinion. Amar Rabbi Asi. Actually, but we're not there yet. My mistake. We have one more little sugya before we get there. Amar Rabbi Asi, ki havu ba Rabbi Yochanan v'Rish Lakish b'para. When Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish will learn about the para aduma, lo mas kimine ela k'may demasik tala mibei krava. They didn't come to any conclusion from this, like a fox who's in a plowed field, where a fox who runs around in a plowed field only brings up a little bit of dust, like nothing really sticks to his body. So likewise, they didn't come to very strong conclusions about this. This goes back to what Ula said. Now, some people read this as, it's inconclusive, meaning you can't make a general rule about all of para. That was the thing about the fox. It can't be clear cut. Sometimes it's one way, sometimes it's the other way, but it's very clear which one is which. It's just that it's not clear because some go one way, some psukim go the other way. Some people say, no, it's not like Ula. They say it's not clear. We agree with Ula that sometimes it's miyad. Sometimes it comes to disagree with the previous. And sometimes it's mimela. Sometimes that pasuk teaches you about the whole, right? It's a continuation of the same person. But it's not so clear when we apply which one. And maybe there's a lack of clarity here in terms of not necessarily there's a lack of clarity that we can't say the whole parsha is always like this or is always like that. No, it's two different principles. That's one way. Or it's two different principles and we're not even sure exactly when to use each one. So it's two different ways of understanding this line. Now we get back to the issue of Shchita Bizar. Tani Tana Kamei Rabbi Yochanan. So someone brings a braita before Rabbi Yochanan. Kol shchitot ksherot bizar chutz mishel para. All shchitot can be done by a zar other than the para aduma. Can't be done by a zar. So somebody, remember people recited braitot, somebody brings this braita. Amalei Rabbi Yochanan, puk t'nei livra. Go teach this outside. Meaning, right, I just did this interview for the Valley Beit Midrash. If you want, you can find it online. But one of the questions he asked me, Rabbi Yanklowitz asked me, what's your favorite Talmudic phrase? And I said this one. Okay, why this one? So it's a difficult phrase because what he's basically saying is get out of my Beit Midrash, right? Don't teach that in my Beit Midrash. But what I like about it is it reflects a whole bunch of different things. It reflects, number one, it reflects his passion. Like, get out of my Beit Midrash. You can't bring this bright into my Beit Midrash. It also, and notice, by the way, it's not that he disagrees with his opinion. He disagrees with the Breita that he's quoting. Remember, people recited Breita. He says, your Breita is messed up. But he doesn't say your Breita is wrong. He says, go teach it outside. Meaning, in my Beit Midrash, I don't agree with you. But there might be others, you can say it outside, right? What I talked about in the interviews, what he's also saying is, he doesn't say go teach it in a different Beit Midrash. There's room for Torah outside the Beit Midrash. You don't only have to learn Torah in the Beit Midrash. This whole debate, and it's a story that talks about these two rabbis who disagreed with, are you allowed to teach in the shuk or not, right? Is Torah meant to be only learned in a Beit Midrash, or can you teach Torah outside? So anyway, there's a lot of interesting things about this, but let's move on. So he says, there's no such thing, right? You said, all shritot uksherot bazar other than the para. He says, I don't agree with you. Lo matzinu shrita bazar psula. There is no case where you can't do a shrita by zar. Now, by the way, I want to point out, this doesn't agree with Shmuel or Rav, because even though he's saying he agrees with one of them, that shrita bazar is kshera b'para, like Shmuel, but Shmuel said the par kohen gadol and Yom Kippurim, that's not kshera bazar. And Rabbi Yochanan says all shchitot are ksherot bazar. Any shchita can be done by a non-kohen. So he has a third opinion. The Rabbi Yochanan lo mabaya l'tana de lotziet. And by the way, it's not just he disagreed with his student about this who brought the Braita. Ela afilu l'rabei lotziet. But he didn't even agree with his rabbi. In other words, he deferred from his rabbi on this topic. To Amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Yishuma ben Yehotzadak, he quoted his rabbi as saying, "Shchitat para bizar psula." It has to be a kohen who does the para aduma. Vani omer kshera, and came Rabbi Yochanan. He said, but I think it's kshera. Lo matzinu shchita shepsula bizar. He says, we've never seen a shchita that's psula bizar, and therefore I disagree with you. So we not only disagree with this bright his student quoted, he also disagreed with his rabbi, and also obviously with Rav and Shmuel, who thought that there is at least one shchita that's kshera bizar. Okay, so which by the way makes my point even further. This Puktani Levra, he said, I don't agree with this opinion, but there were clearly great rabbis that agreed with it. It's not like it's totally off base. But he had his own opinion and he didn't think. And he said, in my Beit Midrash, you don't teach things that are against me, but you can go teach it somewhere else. Balo etza paroshnia. Okay, now we're back to the Mishnah, and then we're going to get to the next Mishnah. We're going back to the order of what he does. He goes back after he does the Shiur Lazazel. By the way, Daf Shalahem this week, which is up now, is all about Shiur Lazazel and what's going on with the ceremony. And, it's a very weird thing. So they give some different opinions. They also quote that Shimshon Rapal Hirsch that I quoted, and they quote some other sources about it. But now he goes back to the Par Hasheni, and he says, I'm going to do, right now he does Vidoy. And remember the Vidoy, the first confession he does is for himself and his family. The second one is for all the Kohanim. So they ask the following question. Why does he include his brothers, the Kohanim, only in the second confession? Why didn't he start off with that? He could have said, I'm confessing for me and my family and all the Kohanim. Why did he wait for the second one? So Tana de Rabbi Yishmael, kachi midat hadin notenet. This is the way it works with midat hadin when you go for judgment. Mutav yavo zakai v'yichaper al chayav al yavo chayav v'yichaper al chayav. Better you should be clean and removed, atone for your sins before you start asking for somebody else. Don't come in when you yourself have sins and try to ask for pardoning for other people. It's like on the airplane, right? Put your own oxygen mask on first and then put your child's on. You have to be in good shape before you go help someone else. You have to be atoned of your sins. And that's why he has to atone for his own sins first. And only after that does he ask for other people. Okay, new Mishnah. Shachato v'kibel b'mazrek etamo. Okay, now you can start looking at pictures. There's pictures that show this process. He slaughters the animal and then, right, remember the way he does it, and then he catches it in a basin, some sort of bowl. And he gives it to someone who's now going to hold this. If you notice, and I'm not sure if you can see it in the picture, but there's a nice picture in the Koran. It wasn't flat at the bottom, the cup, because if it was flat at the bottom, they would put it down, and they wanted to make sure that it never got put down, because what's going to happen? They're not going to sprinkle the blood right now. So what might happen? The blood is going to harden. So in order to prevent it from hardening, they basically say, well, you're going to have to mix it. So they give it to someone else, and he sits there to make sure that the blood doesn't congeal. So he basically, it's like people take a glass of wine and they constantly swirl it. That's what it sounds like he was doing, the swirling action of this bowl. And he keeps swirling it around. Where is he standing? On the Rovet HaRevi'i Shebeichal. Some people say it's the fourth step, which must be on the entrance to the Eichal, though we're going to see where exactly this was, or 4 rows of tiles in, the 4th row of tiles in the Heichal. The Gemara is going to have a problem with this, but we'll get to that later. Kadesh lo yikosh, so that it doesn't congeal. Natal machta, now he's not going to deal with the blood, as I told you, but now he's supposed to do the ktoret. So how does he do the ktoret? He takes a machta, a pan, ve'ala l'rosh ha-mizbeach, he goes up to the top of the mizbeach, ufina gechalim elach ve'elach, and he goes to the maracha that was meant for the gechalim, remember? There's the maracha for the coals. He moves them to the side. He doesn't take the ones from the top. And now he takes from the ones that are underneath, that are as hot as possible. And he puts it now on the fourth row of tiles, or the fourth step again, depending on how you understand it, that's in the azara. B'chol yom, now we're going to have a whole list of things that would happen every day and things that happen on this day. B'chol yom haya choteh b'shal kesef u'ma'areh b'toch shel zahav. He would stoke the coals with, to first take them from a silver vessel, and then he would pour from there, because every day he had to bring coals into the Mizbach HaKtoret. There was no fire going all the time in the Mizbach HaKtoret. They always brought in coals from outside, and then he would put it into a golden vessel. But today, and this is again one of those things they wanted to reduce the workload of the Kohen Gadol, he would start with gold and he would stay with that. He wouldn't move it from one to another. He would start with 4 kav, that's a measurement of volume, and then he would pour into one that held 3 kav. And here again, you wouldn't have that. He would start with the 3 kavim, which is what he needed. Rabbi Yossi Omer, difference of opinion. Which is 6 kav. And then he would pour it into one that only held 3. The second part is the same. It's just a matter of how big was the utensil that he started with in the first place. Generally, it was heavier. Today, it's lighter, again, to lighten the load of the Kohen Gadol. The handle was generally short, but today he's got to remember he does everything. So he has to hold that in one hand. He's got the shovel in the other hand, from which he's going to put his shovel into there and put it in the right and burn it on the fire. So he's going to put it together, and therefore he's he holds the in the shovel. He's got the incense, and then he has in the pan the coals. So now, basically, it had a long handle to make it easier for him to carry. Not sure what the reason for this is. Again, it wasn't exactly green, but the gold was greenish in tint, right? Like RGB or CMY, right? CMYK, right? Or KY, forget, but right, the colors, how much of each color you had. It was greener, and today it was a redder gold. They would do a certain measurement. A pras is 100 maneh. It's a weight of the money, like it's in the weight of money. So that amount in the morning and that amount in the afternoon, half of the maneh. Today, on this day, he would add his handful. It would be larger than normal. Normally, they would grind it very finely. Today, they took whatever ketoret they prepared. Remember, they would prepare it once a year, we learned, but they would then grind it even finer for Yom Kippur. Remember, we learned this whole thing about the yamin. You're always going to the right. So they would always walk up the right part of the ramp. Today, the Kohen Gadol goes up in the middle. It's kind of like this king procession, right? Out of respect, he walks right up the middle. There's a debate about whether it's only the Kohen Gadol or anybody walks up the ramp on Yom Kippur. Rabbi Yehuda Omer disagrees. Lo olam Kohen Gadol ole be'emtza v'yoreh be'emtza. The Kohen Gadol always goes up the middle. It's just the way it is, right? And it's on a regular day, out of respect. Every day when the Kohen Gadol, when he wants to wash his hands, he does it from the basin. But today he does it from a flask of gold. They would pour the water from the kior into this jug type thing, and then he would wash his hands from there. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, La'olam Kohen Gadol Makadesh Yadav Raglav Min HaKiton Shel Zahav. He always did that, not just on Yom Kippur. Tomorrow we'll get into all the details of all the Arba Ma'arachot. I'm not going to get into it now for time's sake. Divrei Rabbi Meir, or we'll get to it right sometime later. Rabbi Yossi Omer, right? We saw there was the Mei Maracha, there was the extra one where they would take the coals. There was one where they had the fire ongoing, and then there's this fourth one about which there's a debate. And today there was an extra one. Rabbi Yossi Omer b'chol yom shalosh, hayom arba. Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'chol yom shtayim, hayom shalosh. There's a whole debate about how many exactly they were. We'll get into this debate later. The Gemara is now going to ask one question, and we'll finish with that. V'hachtiv, doesn't it say b'chol adam lo yeh ba'ol moed? No one's allowed to be in Ol Moed, which also includes the Hechal, when the Kohen Gadol goes into the Kodesh Kodeshim. So how do we have someone standing there with the bowl of blood mixing it around, swirling it in the Hechal. It says on the fourth row of tiles in the Hechal, or the fourth step. So Amar Rav Yehuda Tnei Shel Hechal. It's not Sheba Hechal, but of the Hechal. That means outside the Hechal. It's the fourth row leading up to the Hechal. And clearly, he wasn't standing in the Hechal. He must have been outside. This will finish for today, and we will continue to learn this Mishnah more in depth tomorrow. Have a great day.